So in this video, we're going to create our very own master detail controller application. Typically in iOS apps, we have a template for making applications as the master detail app. So you have like a list of editable or removable items, and you have a plus button in the top of the navigation bar that allows you to add items, and you can tap on each item so that you may see the details of said item. But here, instead of having the default implementation, we want to make our own sort of application where we can add our own items with our own data inputs, like, for example, name, description, and quantity, for example. And we want to have that to be editable and have those items displayed in the list. In order to do that, we have to start with the template. We could do it manually too, which may take a little longer, but what's required here is to learn how to use the template. So let's get into that. So we're going to start off by making a new project. Just so you know, I'm on version 9.2 of XCode. I'm using Mac OS X Sierra, not High Sierra, Sierra still. So just keep that in mind when writing your code. I'm on the latest version of Swift. I'm not using Swift 2 or Swift 3. I believe it's Swift 4 or 5 now. So I'm going to just start by creating a project. So I had that open. And you have a master detail app here. We're going to select that. And your product name, let's call it item manager, because we're going to have a bunch of items. They're going to have a name, a quantity, and description. And organization name, you make your own, whatever you like. I'm going to use mine. So you are it. And there we go. Hit next. Everything's going to be generated. You need to save it somewhere. I have a folder dedicated to my Swift projects, my XCode projects. So I'm just going to save it here. And here we go. Before we get into the actual meat of things, we're going to look at what we got. Let me just maximize this here. Okay, so we're going to go inside the storyboard. It's a little interesting here. It's not your typical static storyboard. We have a couple of things going on. We have a master view controller that sort of splits into a few things right here. So let me just zoom out right here. And we're going to see that we have a few things. It's kind of confusing because if you're familiar with XCode and if you started, you may have worked with some sort of static views and you just add in UI elements and connect them and so on. But here you can't really do anything. It's all pre-made for you. So we're going to run this app just to show you what it does from the template. So we're going to see that we have the list of items. Well, it's going to be empty at the start that are based on this prototype cell. And there's going to be a navigation bar on top that allows you to edit and add. And we'll see that. Hold on. Oh, there it is. Let me just see if I can make this bigger. Show device bezels. Yeah, there we go. So let me just, there we go. So you can see that. So just let it load. And while it's loading, I'm just going to discuss even further. So you'll have a table view, sort of table view with a navigation bar. And the table will be filled with cells that we create. The plus button, by default, will generate just the time of day, the date it was created. And when you tap on the element, you'll be directed to a detail page where this detail view content goes here text will be replaced with the item's title data. Here we go. It takes a while on the first run, so you have to wait a little bit. So what we're going to have here as well is instead of having the date, we're going to make our own sort of custom text type filled in here. But let's get on with the actual app. Here it is. So notice here we have edit. You can't do anything yet. When you have plus, it adds something here. And when you click it, it goes to the detail. You can go back in the navigation bar. And you can edit, which will allow you to remove, and you'll give a confirmation for delete. Okay, So now we're familiar with this app. So that's all basically what it does. So these screens, it looks complicated from here. It's quite simple from here. Everything's quite simple. So you have the done, you have plus, done, edit. So you have edit, done, and so on. What we'll be doing with this app is we're going to change the functionality of the plus button that will allow us to create our own items to be filled into this cell. And we'll change this record, each cell, to display the item name and its quantity. And then when you tap on the item, it'll show you its name, its quantity, and an extra parameter, which is the item description, which will be inputted in the add item form, but it will not be displayed in the cell. So we'll be implementing that in this tutorial. There's a few things we're going to have to be working on in order to achieve this. So we're going to have the detail page altered to accommodate the 3 new attributes. We're going to have the cells, prototype cells that is, altered to display a title and quantity. We're going to have to add a segue to a new view controller. We're going to have to add that view controller. That's going to give us the form for creating new elements instead of just auto-generating the date. And also we're going to have to program the master view controller to accommodate these changes, and also the detail view controller to accommodate these changes. We'll also be adding a new Swift file that's going to manage the view controller for adding new items, excuse me. I'm on places because I've been working on that a lot lately. So what we'll also be doing is creating a class to represent the data for each item. So instead of just having a plain old cell, we're going to have an item with its name, its description, and its quantity. Not in that order, but you get the idea. So that item class will represent the data that is read and that is created. We'll also be using shared storage in our application that'll store the items to the shared storage of this app. Keep in mind, since we're in development, we will have this data constantly erased and replaced when you build again and again. So don't worry about the data not saving when you turn the app on, run the app again. So next, let's move on to analyzing the code. So we analyze the storyboard. It's pretty simple. We won't be doing much, except the biggest thing will be adding a new view controller. But the code is what we'll have to work with quite extensively in this application, because we have a lot of things pre-made. And that's a problem, because you can't just simply resort to GUI programming where you just drag in elements and just connect them. You have to actually program this master, this navigation controller, not the split view controller. This will be left alone, as you'll see. And we'll have to touch the cell a little bit as well. So let's get into the code. Let's look through the master view controller first. It contains the code needed for the add button, that plus button that creates a new object, this new cell. You have the edit button, which allows you to edit the rows. And you also have the segue preparation that allows you to segue to the detail of the cell you have selected. What we have in here is the default implementation, as we mentioned before. What we're going to have to do in this file is implement our storage of items. We're going to have to change the add button to, instead of adding a new button, a new cell that auto-generates the date, we're going to have to make it use a segue to move to our add item view controller. So that'll be here in this add button. And we'll also have to change everywhere where we have objects, this default implementation of this array, this empty array. we're going to have to swap that out for our array stored in our shared storage. So that's what we'll be doing in the master view controller. In our detail view controller, we're going to accommodate the input of our item names, item quantities, and item descriptions. We'll also include validation. For example, quantities should always be integers. And we should not be able to finish the input of a new record, new item, until we have filled certain inputs, because we don't want to have blank cells in our table view, right? So we have to prevent that by disabling the finish button, the submit button, until we have all of the proper inputs filled. So I think the first thing we'll start out with is creating the classes we need to define how items will be interpreted and stored and how the shared storage will work. So let's move on to that. What we're going to do is create a new file. So file, new file. We're going to select Swift file. It's next. And we're going to call it item. So this class is going to represent how items are interpreted and stored in our app. So let me just fix that. There's a little slash there. Okay, so we have a class. You should have autofill in your version of Xcode. So you have class, you press enter, you have a name, we're going to call item. It does not have a superclass because this is our own custom class. And we're going to have a few variables in here. So we're going to have var item name. I'm going to use camel case here. It's going to be a string. We're going to have a var item quant. And it's going to be an integer at first, but we'll fix that in a little bit. And we have var item description. You know what? I'm going to use full names here. So quantity. And that's going to be a string. And then we need an initializer. So init. And you have an item name. So like in object-oriented programming, you have a class with properties, and you need to initialize them somehow when you create an object. So item name is going to be a string. You have an item quantity. Quantity is going to be a string. And you have item description. Rather, I made a mistake here. This should be string. And the input argument should be an integer for item quantity, because naturally you'll think of for quantity of integer. So the final processed data will be a string. Item description will also be a string. And if you're familiar with object-oriented programming, like in Java, you have like self, something like self or this. We're going to here it's self. So you have self item name equals the argument for item name. Pretty simple. Item name, self item quantity is going to be a little different now. We're going to use something in Swift. I think it's also an object-oriented Objective-C, where you have interlopation, I think it's called. You interlope a variable, a value referenced by a variable or constant in parentheses like this. So you have the slash, the forward slash, I think, and you type in your variable name, item quantity. So you don't have to typecast the integer to a string. Instead, you interlope the integer value into the string like so. That way you can have it like this. So self equals item quantity. And then finally you need to have item description returned. Self item description equals item description. So let me just save. So what did I do here? So in Swift, when you have arguments in a function like init or any other function, you'd name the parameters like so, and you put a colon, and you have the data type. So like in the declaration here, you have properties, item name, and so on, and you define what is to be expected. So be sure to have the colon with the type name, especially in classes like this. So I keep using Control S. So here is our class, and that's pretty much it for items. So they'll have names, quantities, and descriptions. And now we're going to move on to storage. It's a little different, but it's a simple class nonetheless. So we'll get that out of the way ahead of time. So we start off by making a new file. File. Swift. We're going to name it storage. And we initialize the text with class. We're going to call it storage. No superclass in this case, so just remove that. Here we're going to have static let storage equals, rather we forgot shared here. You got to have shared because it's going to be a shared static instance of the storage. Storage equals storage with the initialization here. Next thing we got to do is we got to have the variable objects initialized. This will define a variable that will contain an array of items. The item type is defined in our item class. Okay, and now we have a private initialization. So private init. This is an implementation of singleton in Swift, where we only have the initialization privately done once, and this will initialize the objects array with an empty array that expects items. So objects equals item with the parentheses denoting the initialization. And there we go. Let me just see what's up here. Fix. There we go. There was some empty space there. Valid character in source file. Receive fix. Okay, and there we go. So now we are ready to start programming. We have our class storage defined. So our singleton source of data is ready to go. And we have defined how items will be stored. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to replace everywhere where we have objects for the static array. Well, it's not static, but I mean for this default array. We're going to change that to use our shared storage. So I replace objects with our shared storage objects array. So notice here now there's errors because, well, item's not a date and it's date anymore. So we have to change all these. So what we're going to do here is in insert new object, we're going to just demonstrate in the code how inserting a new item might work. Whoops. So we have a new item. And we're going to declare a new item variable. Instead of a variable, we're going to say let. Let basically defines a constant value for this inside this function. So let is going to be constant for now. I mean, let the variable new item is going to be constant for now. It's going to be set equal to a new item based on our class. So we can have our declaration done like this since we defined our item class. Our item name is going to be item number, and we're going to have an item here, and we're going to have a counter just for the sake of testing. So var count equals 0. So in Swift, var means a value that can change, and when you use let, you can't change it, just so you know. And item quantity, we'll just use count. We're going to use the count integer just to demonstrate how the inputs work. And our item description is going to be, this is a desk for item number / interlope count. And we're going to have an interlopation of the count here as well. So count All right. So now we have the new item that's inserted into that array. So instead of auto-generating a date, we have that as well. And here we remove this date typecast. So as exclamation point is unwrapping and sort of typecasting to that type after as exclamation point. We just remove that. Let's save it. And down here as well. And notice here we have an error for detail item. That's something I want to get into in a little bit. But first, so actually, let's get into that now. So this is something I wanted to get into. And this detail item, notice it's going from the controller detail view controller. We're going to have to go over to the detail view controller now to code that a little, because this is going to allow us to display our item details based on the new items that were created. And in order to go continue, we have to fix that. So let's get into that.